1614, I believe we have Mr. Clodfelter and Mr. Mazer-Hart. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Peter Clodfelter, staff to the Regulated Substances and Gaming Committee. House Bill 1614 is titled An Act Relating to the Home Cultivation of Cannabis. Currently, Washington law allows adults age 21 and over to purchase and possess limited quantities of cannabis products from licensed retail outlets, but Washington law does not currently authorize the home cultivation of cannabis other than authorization related to medical cannabis. House Bill 1614 authorizes adults aged 21 and over to produce up to 6 cannabis plants on the premises of their housing unit, subject to production and possession limits and other restrictions and conditions. The bill includes a 15 plant limit per housing unit, regardless of the number of residents living in the housing unit. There's also a requirement to clearly mark plants with the name, residential address, and date of birth of the person growing the plants, as well as the date on which the plants were planted. That same information, in addition to the date on which the plants were harvested, would have to be clearly marked on all containers containing more than 1 ounce of usable cannabis and on all cannabis capable of being processed into usable cannabis or other cannabis products. The bill establishes Class 3 civil infractions related to plants or cannabis being either readily smelled from a public place or the private property of another housing unit, as well as a Class 3 civil infraction if the plants or cannabis are visible within the ordinary public view. The bill also establishes Class 1 civil infractions related to the unsafe storage of homegrown cannabis if a person under age 21 obtains access and possession of the cannabis in certain circumstances. Homegrown cannabis would be prohibited in housing units used to provide early childhood education and early learning services by a family daycare provider or a foster family home. The bill expressly retains landlords' rights to prohibit home grows under the terms of a rental agreement, lease, or other contract. The bill modifies the real property seizure and forfeiture statute as it applies to cannabis. And last, the bill prohibits investigation and enforcement of the new home grow requirements by the Liquor and Cannabis Board, except for the board providing mutual law enforcement assistance to a law enforcement agency upon request. And that concludes the policy side of the briefing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Matt Mazer-Hart, staff to the committee. There's a fiscal note for the bill in your EBB, but you'll notice that a lot of the costs are listed as indeterminate because it's difficult to estimate the number of calls that law enforcement will be asked to respond to for suspected violations of this new bill. There was an estimate for the training costs to law enforcement, one-time training costs to train law enforcement officers on the new law and how to enforce it. Those are estimated at $570,000 in the 23-25 biennium from local government funds. And then the Liquor and Cannabis Board also estimated some costs to enforce the bill. As Peter mentioned, they will assist local law enforcement if they're requested to assist. So they estimated that the cost of that would be a little over 1 FTE per biennium. So $294,000 in the 23-25 biennium, and then $268,000 in the 25-27 biennium. That funding would come from the dedicated cannabis account, but as you know, per the bill that passed last year, if the Liquor and Cannabis Board exceeds the threshold they have of the cannabis account with inflation, the money may need to come from the general fund. So in total, the cost of the bill would be $865,000 in the 23-25 biennium, and then $268,000 in the 25-27 biennium. And again, lots of indeterminate costs when it comes to estimating the cost of responses from local law enforcement. And I'll mention lastly that there are also some indeterminate costs when it comes to the revenue in the dedicated cannabis account. There's a chance that there could be less revenue collected because of fewer retail sales at cannabis shops with this new bill. That's also indeterminate. Just for illustrative purposes, if there was a 0.5% reduction in sales because of this bill, it would result in a $5 million reduction to the general fund per biennium ongoing. Again, just an illustrative purpose, those costs are indeterminate, and that concludes my remarks.
Thank you both very much. Any questions for Mr. Clodfelter or Mr. Mazur-Hart? I had a question, Matt, on just on your last point on the illustrative model. What would have resulted in a $5 million revenue loss? I'm sorry, I didn't catch the
Good
first part.
question. A 0.5% reduction in sales of cannabis at cannabis shops would result in a $5 million general state fund reduction per
Thank you.
biennium.
Thank you very much. Representative Sandlin.
How did you arrive at the 0.5% reduction in sales? I mean, how do we know?
That's a really good question, and that is purely illustrative. There is no good model to estimate whether that is high, low, just an example of what it potentially could be if it was a 0.5% reduction.
Representative Sandlin.
6 plants. What's the estimated harvest yield on 6 plants for usable flower from those plants? Anybody know?
I don't know. Yeah, I think we would have to check on that and get back to you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't think we have any more questions. Thank you both very much. And we'll go to public testimony. Representative Gregerson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let's go ahead and bring forward in the room Joshua Rutherford, Taylor Garner, and James McRae. And then in the remote, if we could try to advance John Kingsbury, if you see him, Laura Kaminsky, and Scott Waller. Good afternoon. Taylor, are you Taylor?
I am Taylor.
Go ahead and go forward if you'd like.
Well, thank you so much, Chair and committee members. My name is Taylor Gardner. I'm the Deputy Policy Director for the Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs, and I'm here to testify on House Bill 1614. Generally speaking, our members do not agree with the proposal of permitting home grow and would prefer the state maintain its commitment pursuant to I-502 that this industry remain in a well-regulated commercial setting. Unfortunately, as I'm sure this committee is aware, public safety threats plague cannabis retailers in the state, and we surely don't like the idea that those threats and crimes go home with people looking for other ways to acquire cannabis products. But if this committee and the legislature are going to consider permitting home grow, we would like to offer just 3 quick points of feedback. First, we'd ask that this committee consider defining safe storage. The bill plainly states that it does the opposite in not doing that. We would suggest that you look toward perhaps Nevada's home grow laws, which requires that an enclosed area either be locked or equipped with a security device. Second, we ask that you would address what is the basis for a seizure and forfeiture. Again, the bill currently addresses this in the negative only, and we'd like to see you address that in the affirmative. And last but not least, we would like to suggest yet another portion of the law belonging to Nevada, which relates to regional access. So under Nevada law, it would allow home grow only where somebody doesn't live within 25 miles of a retail store. And again, pursuant to that commitment made under 502, we'll ask that you consider that as well.
Thank you. So let's go ahead and go online to Laura.
Sure. Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Laura Kaminsky, and I'm here representing the Cannabis Alliance, an industry trade organization representing both licensed growers and retailers. I'm here testifying in support. Our industry members have supported the idea of home cultivation for many years, not only because we do not see it as a threat, we see it as a potential support. This is because gardening is hard and gardening cannabis is especially difficult. When we think of home cultivation, we can't help but draw correlations between the home brewing boom and the explosion of craft breweries and craft beer. We believe the same will occur in our industry with the production of higher quality craft products. The Cannabis Alliance was so convinced of this outcome that they commissioned a study at WSU to look into the economic impact of home cultivation. The study found, and I quote, "Given the growth of the sector in other states where home production is legal, one would be hard-pressed to argue that retail sales would be harmed by legalization of home production. In fact, those states with legal home production have higher growth rates than Washington overall. There's untapped potential here to foster innovation and improvements in quality that will further lift the state's overall economy. For these reasons and so many more, we are in support of this bill and urge your passing. Thank you." And that study is in your.
Thank you so much. Rep.
minute as
Gregerson?
testimony.
Thank you. Before, Scott, I just want to make sure, John Kingsbury, are you around? And you're in person? Great. Scott, when you're ready.
Sure. Good afternoon, Chair Armsby, Ranking Member, Committee members. My name is Scott Waller, Board Member with Washington Association for Substance Misuse and Violence Prevention. We oppose HB 1614. I-502 meant for recreational cannabis to be closely regulated and accessed by youth strictly forbidden. This bill is in opposition to both those principles. Purchase of recreational cannabis through state licensed cannabis retailers was intended to generate revenues for the state. Home grows will reduce revenues for the state. This bill would increase costs for LCB and would require training law enforcement from already tight local government budgets, all to subsidize cannabis home grows. The limits on numbers of cannabis plants would be impossible to enforce. Local law enforcement doesn't have the officers and would need search warrants to effectively monitor the activities of home grows. Grow operations in homes could be in areas that are not regularly monitored and are accessible to children. The bill does not specifically require home grow products to be protected from access by youth. We urge you to not advance HB 1614. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Waller. Representative Gregerson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. John, when you're ready.
Yeah. Hello, my name is John Kingsbury. Thank you to the committee. So far, 20 states have legalized non-medical possession and use of cannabis. Of those, 17 plus Washington, D.C. have approved small personal use cannabis gardens. Some have concerns about what might happen if Washington allows personal home growing. We know from the experiences of other states what the effects are because those 17 states have already conducted the experiment for us. In those states, it has not caused youth use to increase, nor has it caused related crime to increase. Some worry that this will cause a bunch of people to suddenly grow and that will hurt regulated sales and tax revenues. But this has not happened in other states. Most other states have a higher per capita sales in cannabis than Washington State does now. Regarding the fiscal note, let me say this. Whether or not you buy whether the fiscal note is credible, it's critical to remember that when voters approved Initiative 502 11 years ago, the primary reason cited for the initiative was not to create state tax revenue, but rather to limit the continuing social harms caused by prohibition.
Could you conclude your remarks, Mr. Kingsbury?
Yes. Given that the state has reported annual cannabis revenues in excess of $500 million per year, this fiscal note seems like a very small price to pay in service of that primary goal. Thank you.
Representative Gregerson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That concludes those